everyone, and welcome to this brand new spoiler review episode for Moon Knight, episode 3, here from the
Geek
Buddies.
Hey!
Doing our best.
We did talk about this beforehand, and that's the best we could do.
We did try to schedule, but like Steven and Mark, we're not maybe 100% in sync just yet. So it's our first time kind of doing this solo here for Moon Knight review. Thanks to everybody who joined us live yesterday for our Geek Buddies Q&A there with Laura Kelly joining us as a special guest. Our brother in Geek, Michael Vogel, is out there traveling Europe for a friend's birthday and having some fun and probably taking a much-needed vacation with the amount of work that he does as well. But we're here to hold down the fort for episode 3. Shannon's called The Friendly Type. And this one really was this is one of the difficult episodes. I enjoyed the first 2 episodes because I like the banter and the back and forth with Steven and with Mark and with Layla coming in the second episode. But now we've got ourselves so much going on here. The adventure begins, I guess, is another way you could actually kind of title this episode, because we are trying to catch Harrow here. You know, the last shot of the end of episode 2 was him after drinking and seeing Steven in the mirror. Mark walks out. We see the pyramids of Egypt. He is in Egypt. He's been brought to Egypt by Khonshu, and now they've got to go and find Harrow and stop him from opening Amit's tomb. There's a sarcophagus that needs to get found. Layla gets more involved in this. Steven and Mark are having back and forth issues, and I think most definitely, I know some people are skirting around it in their reviews, but I think I'm going to say most definitely a third personality has shown up here. Is it Jake? We'll find out as things go along in the next few episodes for sure, but it seemed to be Jake. Jake is a cab driver in the comic books and much more fierce and violent personality that exists within the triumvirate of personalities in the Marc Spector body. So, Shannon, a lot to discover here. You are well known for being a Raiders of the Lost Ark fan, a Raiders franchise fan, period. You enjoy these kinds of finding ancient artifacts, using maps, using the moon, the sun, and all this kind of stuff. So talk to me. Did you enjoy this episode? Because I know that you've been kind of lukewarm to okay about the first 2 episodes. Did this one get you back on board?
Well, I mean, I feel like my lukewarmness to the first 2 episodes, a lot of it has been technical. A lot of it has been just me not necessarily jiving with some of the directorial choices. A lot of the writing, a lot of the mystery, I actually have enjoyed. I mean, I know a lot of folks who watch us on YouTube, leave comments, think that I have it out for this show. But a lot of it is just technical, and that does extend into this next episode. I mean, the adventure, the chase, the treasure hunt, that is definitely my speed, and a lot of this episode really worked for me. I mean, I love the puzzles that we find when we go and meet what is it, Mogart?
Yeah, Mogart,
yeah. I mean, I love that. I mean, I love that visual that we get at the end with Khonshu basically, you know, turning back the sky to 2,000 years ago. I mean, that's my bread and butter. I mean, I'm a huge Raiders fan. I'm a huge Uncharted, the games fan. I'll probably buy Uncharted on Blu-ray when it comes out, even though I don't think it's like the best movie. But I mean, I want to support the genre as much as I can. Right. Yeah, I really did enjoy this, and I liked how much we're getting now of Mark and Steven figuring out how to work with each other. I think I'm a little with Kalinowski. Having Mark in the driver's seat for me worked a little bit better, but I understand the necessity of having Steven in it for an uninitiated audience who doesn't really know the character. Like, this was the best way to introduce this person who has a dissociative identity disorder. Yeah. I do think some of the action was not as smooth as I would have liked. Okay. But there's still,
fight sequences as well.
Yes.
Do you include the fight? Okay. All right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what it is about this series that, again, for me, that the action just isn't quite landing. Okay. As many issues as I had with Falcon and Winter Soldier, I did think the action is a place that they did do well. Yeah. And I thought the action in Hawkeye was fantastic.
Yeah, agreed.
So it's not. I don't know what it is. It's a second unit issue or what, but it's just not that smooth to me. And we'll talk more about it when we get to this one particular section. But overall, I really enjoyed this episode, even though there were a couple of issues that I had with it.
Yeah, I have to say I enjoyed the episode, but I think I was more in your camp from the first 2 episodes. By the end of this episode, I don't mind. Obviously, I like Raiders. I enjoy the excavating and all that kind of stuff, but I felt there was too much coincidences here, and there was a little, and especially the Iliad stuff. Let me tell you something. Shannon can go off about the action sequences and the fight choreography, which I totally respect. But for me, when you have actors who are boring playing avatars of these gods, these ancient Egypt gods, you're going to lose me. And this whole thing that they were snowed over by Harrow so quickly, so easily, when they could have, like, sent a bunch of their avatars to walk over to where Harrow was to investigate the site. I mean, it seemed like this was a rigged judgment from the beginning, because Harrow just came in, said a couple things, said, this dude's crazy, so I'm clean, right? And it just seemed a bit too convenient for plot point situations. And this is where you find the danger of a 6-episode series, in my opinion. You have to cut corners. You have to have scenes that could be really interesting and have some powerful back and forths. You have to kind of cut the power out from under them to get to the end result, which is Khonshu being warned that he's going to be put in, going to be put in stone or whatever by the end of the episode if he does, or if he messes with the sky again, right? And so you're setting up what's going to happen at the end of the episode. He does get put in stone, but Harrow simply gets to get away with this situation. And the fact that they just kind of believe him after he separated himself from Khonshu, I would have liked a little more of like questioning of Harrow. So it just seemed a little weird to me. And Osiris seems to really have it out for Khonshu. So these gods are very petty. And so to me, that kind of drives me away from the situation. And we didn't get all of them in the Iliad showing up. So I saw some people speculating that Gore the God Butcher may be a reason for that. And that's how this might be connected to Thor, which will be fascinating if they make that all work. But that being said, what you said earlier, I do like the Marc and Steven getting to understand where the other one works. Steven at times was coming off a bit like a whiny, nagging guy when he was like, don't kill him, Marc, don't kill him. And I guess for me, I'm a little more like, look, you got to do what you got to do. You got to get to the situation. There's more lives at stake than your feelings here, Steven. So for me, and I find this is a tendency of mine lately in these shows, is I'm like, let's get to the point, and enough with the I don't know, back and forth in our minds about what to do. Let's get to the point. But of course, that's where the conflict lies. And you've got to have Steven have just as much agency as Marc. And so we saw the moments where Marc is finally understanding how much Steven's knowledge of the hieroglyphics and Egyptian language and being able to like figure these puzzles out are so essential to them being able to do what they need to do in this situation. Now, I don't know how much Marc knew in the past, and certainly not having Layla with him, it seems to have, they've done adventures in the past, kind of hurts him a little bit. So having them all come together is how they were able to get to where they were going here. And Shannon, what's your feelings? Let's jump into the thing. What's your feelings on Layla? We get right off the bat, let's jump through the storylines here. Layla, right off the bat, we see her getting a fake passport. We hear that she hasn't been to Egypt in 10 years. We hear that it's connected to her father dying. I think that woman is a person in the comics. So I'm not sure who they're trying to connect her to. She seemed to have worked for her father. Certainly she says at the end there, that's your baggage, not mine. And somehow in this crowded country, sorry guys, she runs into Marc in a crowded square somehow at the exact moment when he's there getting juice, trying to find that sarcophagus. Then we have their back and forth in the boat talking about their relationship and their wedding, and he talked about, I haven't heard that music or those sounds since our wedding. And then, of course, because Marc says, let's not talk about our shit. Then Marc talks about our shit. And then we get to
how many times has that happened in an argument? I don't want to talk about this anymore. But another thing.
Oh, one more thing. And then we get to Gaspard Ulliel there, the late Gaspard Ulliel. Sadly, we see him there. And the back and forth with her. And of course, that is, I think Midnight Man is who that is who he might be playing. But of course, he's passed away. So I don't know if they're going to recast that. And that scene feels clunky to me as well. And then eventually she's there with Steven, with Marc, who initially Moon Knight, then becomes Mr. Knight, and helps Khonshu turn back the night sky so they can figure out where this tomb of Ammit is. So talk to me how you feel Mia Calamawy is doing with this character now, having a much more central role to play here in this episode, And how did you enjoy they kind of laid her out in this episode?
Yeah, I really liked how much they gave her to do. I mean, we talked about at the end of episode 2, like, you know, what do we think? And it's like, well, she doesn't have a ton to do yet.
Right. Not yet.
In this episode, especially with that opening scene where she's getting the passport, like you get a sense of her past, that her father was, you know, some sort of archaeologist, and you get a sense of her affection for Marc, even though she wants to kind of, she knows it makes sense to kind of cut ties, but this is, you know, this is her husband. I mean, this is the man that she loves, and it's not easier said than done. So it's funny, the thing that you brought up, like with the Ennead and everything, and you know, I'll get back to Calamawy in a second, but you know, with all films, all television series, I mean, there are going to be imperfections. Like, there's no such thing as a perfectly executed movie. I mean, you might be able to make the argument for like Back to the Future, but it's the things that stand out for you. Yeah. And that's why it's a subjective medium where, you know, you can watch Infinity War and Endgame, which I love those movies. If you really kind of break down the logic, it's like, well, that doesn't actually make sense. That actually wouldn't have worked. But if you're enjoying the story enough that doesn't bother you, have at it. Like the first 2 episodes, there were things that bothered me enough, that stood out for me enough, that sort of affected my enjoyment. So it's interesting. Like, that's how it was with you with the Ennead. Like, those actors, they didn't bother me. I mean, it was just sort of one of those situations. I'm like, I get what this is. I get what they're trying to do. But for you, that was something that really stood out to you. Like, you felt that these performers needed to be a little more dynamic.
If they're going to be avatars of gods, I'd like them to be a little more dynamic. Yes. You know, so for me, just for me, but I hear what you're saying. Right. For me, it just didn't work.
The scene, like, and again, like, total happenstance, total coincidence. And this is something that you know, Vogel's very good at dinging people on in the room, is the level of coincidence that the audience will accept. Now, Marc running into Layla in the square after he's gotten that juice, it's like, yes, that is a bit of a coincidence.
All you needed is a scene where she's been tracking him, and then boom, she shows up. It really would have been a 30-second scene to add into the mix that would have made much more sense. But again,
absolutely. I mean,
again, there's probably examples of coincidence throughout all these Marvel shows and movies that I'd be like, oh, that made sense to me. I didn't care. Boom. Yeah.
Of course. And that one didn't bother me. There's one coming up that I'll tell you about that I think people are going to be like, oh, really? You know, that's so nitpicky. But for me, I'm like, this particular moment, I'm like, oh, come on. You needed 5 seconds. You needed 5 seconds. But the scene with the 2 of them on the boat, I really enjoyed. I mean,
I agree with that. I like that scene.
You get that connection. And then later when when Steven takes over and Layla's watching him work, and how Layla, the whole concept of having these multiple personalities, like this is new for Layla. And there's something intriguing about Steven that you know, you can see in her eyes. Like, she's really intrigued with this guy, because he looks exactly like Marc, but he's a little different. And there was one other thing that she did, the fight scene with Beck. I thought she would. I was a little more invested with that fight scene than I was with Moon Knight. And like, I love the visual of the Moon Knight costume. I think some of the CGI is a little distracting. I mean, not to the point that it's a no-go for me, but watching her fight with Beck, like, I was like, oh, I'm actually more interested in this one right now. So I think, you know, she's been given more to do, and she's really knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like her. I like her energy. It works so well with what we're doing here. She's very self-composed, you know, and obviously in the comics, the character that she's playing from the comics isn't quite as in charge of things as she is here, right? And so I like that they've adjusted and kind of honed some things to make it work for the 2022 sensibilities. I shudder to think how this would look in 2015, how different the character would be, you know, and it probably played for jokes, or not maybe have as much strength in, or how can I say this, as import, I guess, in the overall story. So having her be the lead scene you see in this episode, I think, is great. speaks volumes that they really want the audience to connect to this character, and then watching her navigate what she's navigating here, and then having those moments of tenderness with Marc. Did you totally believe? And then the moments where she's fighting, you know, that double move with the stabbing Beck there with the pieces of her necklace, that was brilliant. A great move. And you can sense the ferocity there. And of course, she runs out there to help Moon Knight, and the camera follows her as she jumps over the fence and shoots, and then of course gets hit from behind, and then Marc flips out and has to kind of save her as Moon Knight. But you sense that she's getting more, and then of course her falling in love with Steven. This is something that Mia is doing really well, is we're sensing her connection with Marc. We're sensing her issues with Marc, and certainly her confronting Marc after Harrow has kind of alluded to the fact there that he might have something to do with her father's death. The back and forth. I don't know how much Marc is lying in that scene and how much he's protecting her from the actual truth in that scene. And we're going to find out, I suppose, as the show goes along. But then what that leads to later is her kind of having these moments where she's telling Marc, cut it out, let Steven through, both at the sarcophagus and later on when they're out there in the desert, trying to figure out how to line up the stars and get all that squared away. So there's a lot more that she's involved in that I think gives her such an interesting charm and appeal to the viewer. So I like that we're getting much more with her. And I have a feeling there's some come to Jesus moments coming between them. Certainly they've been referencing her father a lot from the second episode, the exposition in the car with those two detectives, to here now with what Harrow is using against her. And that's another part of this thing. Let's move on to that. I mean, we'll get to Marc and Steven because that's really the crux and the big storyline to talk about. Let's talk about Harrow. How do you feel Harrow is coming along as a villain in this piece? We see him, you know, having the back and forth with Steven in the last episode and revealing that he was the former avatar of Khonshu. And here we have him going to Ammit's tomb, finding this thing, trying to get in touch with it, then showing up out of the blue to confront them there at what's his name again? The guy that has the sarcophagus?
Mogart.
Yeah, Mogart. At Mogart's place, confronting him, Midnight Man there at Mogart's place. And then he's just showing him the power and immediately snows the Ennead. And then in the end, when he sees the night moving and all that stuff in the sky, he says to Khonshu, you brought this on yourself. He even has little jokes there during the scene with the Ennead gods when he's like, hey, you know, I don't miss that voice, and the back and forth with all that. So do you like how they're developing Ethan or and this character of Arthur Harrow, or do you think it's a little bit lacking here?
Well, I mean, I think Ethan Hawke is doing a really, really great job. I think he's a fascinating villain, and like, you know, the best villains are the ones who don't think that they're the villain. You know, we're all the heroes of our own story. He thinks he is 100% correct. I mean, the mustache twirling bad guy, you know, that's you know, that's not always that fun, right? Unless you're talking about like Andy Serkis's you know, Ulysses Claw, like that guy is a blast.
He is a blast.
But the approach that Ethan Hawke is taking, this guy who truly believes, like a true believer, I think it's great. I mean, the Ennead scene, I 100% agree that the moment's like, look, I was just visiting the desert. I'm just a simple caveman. These ways are your ways are confusing to me. Like, I thought that was a pretty, maybe the Egyptian gods have been a little disconnected from humanity and be like, this guy,
lost the overvoid. Yeah.
that seems a little, that seems like a pretty easy excuse. But I think what he is doing is great. The scene, that big action scene at Mogart's, the thing that kind of, like, the whole scene, I had some story problems with, because I get why Harrow shows up. Like, he does not want Marc and Layla to have this information. Like, even though, like, he knows where the tomb is. I mean, that the little compass told him. We're presuming that they're digging, like they're going to find it.
But there's going to be multiple coffins, I imagine, down there in that tomb, right? I mean, it's not like one. I mean, you know?
I wouldn't necessarily think with that, because Amit wasn't a person. I mean, she was an entity. I mean, she was like I think she's kind of portrayed as a creature more. So I feel like the tomb, it's not going to be like they're going to have to check multiple sarcophagus to look for a body or for a mummy. Really? I think it's something she's locked away. That's what I'm taking from it. I could be 100%
that's why they wanted
wrong.
to find this sarcophagus that supposedly is going to lead them to the actual location of the tomb. Okay. All right, fair enough. But, go ahead. Yeah.
Like, I did like the part where Harrow does sort of demonstrate this power. Like, look at what this can do. And then he just sort of casually leaves, which is, what they need him to do for the story. They need him out of the way, but it just wasn't handled. It wasn't handled in the most interesting way. I mean, the moment that he walked away, it's like, so did you guys come to a deal? Like, you said you were going to give Mogart the treasure, but you just kind of blew up the sarcophagus and kind of pieced out. So again, I think Ethan Hawke is doing a great job, but I don't disagree with you that this probably wasn't handled the most interesting.
Yeah, fair enough. And for those of you who don't know Midnight Man, he came up in Moon Knight #3 back in 1981. He's a thief who would dress up in an all-black costume and steal famous works of art and jewels and from museums and mansions around the world. And he would commit his robberies exactly at midnight, Shannon. So, and someone pointed out here that I was reading some of the Easter eggs here, that when he gets stabbed or shot, whatever it is, that he gets stabbed by what Moon Knight throws there.
One of the little moon daggers.
Yeah, little crescent daggers there. The clock rings midnight. So maybe there's a little allusion there to Midnight Man, so to speak. So kind of interesting. But they do kind of keep the spirit of that character, because clearly he is a guy who goes and finds this stuff, and he claims he's doing it to protect the artifacts from the wrong people. And it's exactly what Layla says at the beginning when that older lady calls her out for stealing, and she says, it's not stealing these artifacts. I'm returning them back to their rightful owners. And maybe I keep a few just to pay the rent and sell them just to pay the rent. So everyone's got their sliding scale of morality in this situation when it comes to artifacts, which I think is fascinating on so many levels. But I liked the character, and that's just a shame that Gaspar passed away. Obviously a shame in real life, but certainly a shame for the actual story too, because who are they going to get to come in and play Midnight Man if they're going to make that character a part of it? Who was his henchman again? What's his name? Beck. Were you happy to see him introduced in this way and then easily wiped out by the end in that scene? I thought that was a little bit of a letdown. I thought that actor was really powerful, had nice commanding energy. He should have been one of the avatars of the gods, for God's sakes. Did you like that they took him out so quickly?
I mean, again, not being overly familiar with Moon Knight's bench, the guy did his job. Like, you're in, kid, you're in. Go. I mean, I don't know how many of these characters are they going to be necessary going forward. Like Gaspar Ulliel. I mean, I think I'm saying that right. Yeah. He was fantastic, and I think I actually wrote in my notes, like, it's a real shame that we're not going to get to see this guy again. I mean, obviously because of his untimely passing, but this is an actor who it's one of those things where it's that thing you can't teach, that some people just have this quality, he just has a magnetic presence on screen. Yeah. And he was one of those guys. And my assumption is that had he lived, depending on how Moon Knight turns out, my guess is that we would have seen him again in some form, just because again, he was just very, very unique. He just had a very specific quality that is sort of indefinable, the je ne sais quoi. But yeah, I mean, he really, really interesting. But yeah, I agree that the actor who played Beck as well, I thought that guy, I thought all the actors did a good job. I think what they were given may not have been the strongest.
Fair enough. And then we'll see what happens, obviously, because I mean, Mogart made a reference to Madripoor, right? The line is after Madripoor, I'm sure you two will have a lot to talk about. So maybe that character is being lined up as the Baron Zemo for this section of the MCU with Moon Knight. That's a possibility as well, and having him like kind of connect up with these other guys. So he's very aware as a power broker, for lack of a better term himself, of who's involved on all this kind of stuff. So,
and it's also an acknowledgement to the larger MCU. Like we haven't really gotten a lot of that in this series, and it's probably probably by design. Something that I did notice was when they were creating Layla's passport. The distribution date was 2021, and I want to say the expiration date was 2028. So I'm like, I wonder when this show takes place. Is this before 2023? Is this before Endgame? Because the fact that Harrow did not mention Thanos, well, I guess that wouldn't make sense, actually. Like, they're aware of Thanos at this point. Never mind.
Yeah.
I thought I had something really insightful. Never mind.
That's what a review show is for us to work out our thoughts as we talk about this stuff. So I had no issue with that. Yeah, and they're basing a lot of that, what we're going to see here throughout this series, we're seeing it based on Jeff Lemire and Greg Smallwood's run from 2016. So you can read that run and find some more information on some of the stuff that's going on here in this series. Let's move to Steven and Marc here. Shannon, as we alluded to and kind of mentioned a little bit already, this growing understanding of each other, whereas Steven was really scared of Marc and didn't want Marc to have as much power and control over his body. And certainly Steven was disappearing for days and assuming that it was Marc every time. Now we've got Marc kind of understanding that Steven, he's got to figure out how to work with Steven, because Steven does have some positive benefits to being a part in this body. But as we see in that fight with those three dudes on top of the roof, Steven and Marc kind of disappear on each other in this situation, end up in the cab, sees the guys come down, confronts them, chases them, then gets knocked out. And when he comes to, he is killing all these guys. And then the third kid, who he kind of slapped in a little bit of a reference to Kill Bill, I think, in my opinion, grabs Khonshu, tells him to hang him off the cliff, and the kid cuts his own scarf and kills himself. And Khonshu says, "Oh, I thought he'd talk." And so we know, and both Steven and Marc say, "I didn't do this." So clearly, I think Jake Lockley is making a appearance here. And some people thought that he was in the cracked mirror that we saw in episode 2. I saw some of our viewers comment that in the comment section below, that they thought that he appeared there. So we may have seen Jake Lockley already without knowing it. And some of these disappearances or missing days in Steven's life may have been consumed by Jake Lockley. So do you think we've opened the door to a third personality? If both of them claimed that they weren't killing those three guys, or they didn't kill those three guys, or two guys that were there, and then the third one that died, of course, in Marc's hands. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think Vogel's the one that had speculated in episode 2, when we did get to, we got more of Marc, that whoever asked out Steven's museum coworker, that tour guide, that after getting to know Marc, and we see Marc's affection for Layla, like that wouldn't have been Marc. Maybe that was Jake. And we also, I mean, the fight, while I didn't think the fight choreography was like the smoothest, like I did like the character building that it did, because that moment that Marc chooses to slap that kid, while very, very funny, it's also, maybe Marc is not this stone cold killer that he has been portrayed to be. Like, we see that moment of, like, he doesn't necessarily, like, this is a teenager. He's like, I don't want to punch a kid. I'm going to snap him to get him out of the way, but I don't want to, I don't want to hurt him.
Yeah.
And then whatever happens, like when Marc kind of phased out, when he saw Steven and the knife, whatever happened, which we are presuming is Jake at that point, whatever happened was scary enough for those three guys to run. And when Jake got out of it, or when Marc got out of the cab and said, "I want to talk to you," and they want nothing more to do with him, like, leave us alone, man. And then you see, when it cuts to that cliff where he's killed the two guys. I think we're getting a really interesting picture of Marc and what he is and what he isn't willing to do. Whether it's on behalf of Khonshu or not. And also this idea that Marc potentially had something to do with Layla's father's death. If he was the one who was responsible, was it him or was it Jake?
Yeah, that's a great point, Shannon. And it's interesting, Shannon, because we also get a little bit more of the conversation with Marc and Layla in the boat. There's a reference that Marc says, like, I used to be able to control it. For some reason, now I can't. And I wonder why that is, because look, each of them has to ask the other one to give them the body. Jake doesn't seem to need to ask anybody to take over the body. So is Jake the personality that gets triggered when he's either very, very sexually aroused by somebody or feels very, very threatened that their lives are at stake in a situation, and Jake is the thing that is the personality that takes over without asking permission. So, I mean, this is what I kind of was thinking about as you were talking. Jake is the one. We haven't seen Jake go, let me take over the body at all yet. So
right. Well, and also you think back to episode 1, that scene in Bavaria where Steven has the scarab and those guys are surrounded him. And the next time, like, he blips out, when he comes back, his hand is covered in blood. Now, we are all presuming that was Marc. Now seeing sort of the brutality of what this third individual does. And again, Marc's hesitance to cross a line, it seems. Now we're starting to think like, oh, is Jake the one who is able to involuntarily take the body without asking permission? And like my guess is that we're going to find out whatever this event was that has sort of taken away Marc's ability to keep his other persons in check. My guess is that we're gonna find out what that is, and it's probably related to Khonshu. That this third entity, whether it be Jake or not, that this third entity is willing to do the things that Marc won't.
Yeah, we have to find out too, what is sparking the dissociative identity disorder? Is it Khonshu, or did he have this already before Khonshu made contact with him? Did Khonshu, as Harrow said, Marvel over the last few years with their villains, they have given them some elements of truth in their counter arguments against the heroes. And certainly here in episode 2, Harrow says, and certainly here in the trial in front of the Ennead that Khonshu chose this guy because he is unstable. Because, well, I don't want to say unstable in a negative way, but certainly he's got the dissociative identity disorder situation that Khonshu can manipulate. So did Khonshu choose him, or did Khonshu cause this to happen inside Marc Spector, assuming he is the main personality here in this body? So I'm going to be very curious if we get a flashback to that situation, Khonshu's first appearance to Marc Spector, and what that caused in Marc. Because if Marc was already leaning this way, already had dissociative identity disorder, having an Egyptian god influence you to be involved in all this shit can't be good for your mental health. So I wonder how much they're going to explore. And if you read the comics, certainly it's an uneasy alliance with Khonshu all the time, for sure, with all the personalities, even Jake. So I'm going to be very curious to see what more we're going to get. And do you like, just to go back to this thing, I don't think you addressed it 100%. Do you like that Steven and Marc are kind of figuring it out? How do you see them? Do you see Jake as the danger of these two figuring it out?
Yes, that's one of the things that I really, really enjoyed this episode, especially in the sarcophagus scene, that you got to see the negotiation between Marc and Steven.
Yeah.
Knowing that if he gives up the body, chances are he might not get it back.
Yes.
And if he doesn't get the body back, if he doesn't fulfill this deal with Khonshu, then Khonshu is potentially going to take Layla.
Yeah.
And so it makes for a really interesting moral argument. Like, I think that's sort of the goal of the character, is you want to find sort of this harmonious relationship with the personalities, but that's the end goal. Like for an audience, like we need the conflict, because that's what keeps the story going.
Yeah.
When they are kind of firing on all cylinders, that's going to be really satisfying at the end of this road. But like you're starting to see the begrudging respect that they are gaining for each other. Like the moment where Mr. Knight appears in that action sequence and he gets stabbed. Yeah. I mean, he's trying to calm everybody down. Everybody chill the F out. Boom, gets stabbed. Take the body, take the body, take the body.
Yeah, right, exactly. So not so much begrudging, more like necessitating the need to get the body back to Marc. So Steven's understanding that there are situations where his particular brand of assuming he can talk his way through things is not going to work. And so certainly 2 or 3 lances through your body will make you change your mind for sure. Let's move on to this. I know we've been mentioning it a number of times here. Let's move on to this conversation with the ending, because I think as much as I may not have liked it, there was a lot of stuff that was revealed here about the gods and their approach. And I don't know about you, Shannon, but I got Eternals vibes from some of the things that Osiris's avatar and the other avatars were saying. And Khonshu called them out through Marc's body, saying, like, you guys need to come back from the opulence of the overvoid. You need to save this realm. And the gods respond back saying, no, the humans rejected us, so we don't need to believe in them. We're just observing. This is stuff we heard from the Eternals saying the same thing. We'd observe, we don't interfere. So what did you think about this scene in terms of laying the groundwork for how these gods and these avatars are going to work? Do you sense by the end of the episode that there is an uneasy alliance, or maybe a convenient alliance between the Osiris avatar and Harrow? Are they more in on what Harrow is trying to do than you might think, because they seem to have a certain kind of bitterness towards humanity by saying that humanity rejected them? So what problem would they have with Ammit coming forth to deliver punishment ahead of time before humanity does anything, or members of humanity do anything? Do you think that we maybe had a preview of that here in this whole scene?
Possibly. I mean, the whole section, again, the actors didn't bother me. The whole section I really enjoyed. I mean, I love the introduction where they were talking about the portal to get there, and this wall just opens up. I mean, that, again, that's the Raiders Uncharted stuff that I love. I'm like, oh, fantastic. And again, like my enjoyment of F. Murray Abraham as Khonshu is growing and growing and growing. Again, that first episode, I really wasn't jiving with his approach. And I don't know if he recorded on separate days, but I think I said last time, like, I feel like somebody different was in the booth with him and pointed him.
They gave him more to do. They gave him more levels to play rather than like, get away from him, summon the suit, do this. This is more. He's more
the
having
idiot's
it
back.
Yeah, the idiot is back. You said you could control the moron, and now it's more a matter of a back and forth about what's happening here. So maybe that's another part of this movie that's helping you enjoy him more. I don't know.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I like his dynamic with Marc better. Like, and it gets to an interesting place with Steven by the end of this episode. But the actual scene, like, I thought, because of how they've changed the Asgardians for the cinematic universe, where they're essentially aliens. Yeah. That's been a question. Like, are the Egyptians, are they gods? I mean, basically the overvoid is sort of like another plane of existence, I guess. Yes. And again, I was getting the Gore the God Butcher question in my head as well. Like, if these are gods, right, are they on Gore's hit list? So the whole concept I thought was really cool, but the moment that you're referring to with the Osiris avatar and Harrow, it definitely seems like there is some sort of cooperation going on, because Harrow was walking in the lead. Yeah. And Osiris was walking behind him. And I think that, I mean, obviously for the camera, you want Ethan Hawke in the forefront. Right. But I think from a character point of view, like, that makes, he almost seemed deferential to him. Mm-hmm. And whatever this plan is, this plan with Ammit, if like a permanent severing of the Egyptian gods to Earth, like, is that something they want to, like, is what do they get out of this? Like, they have their avatars to observe, but what else do they get out of this relationship that they have as these ancient Egyptian gods? Yeah. And again, going back to F. Murray Abraham for just a second, like, I know I'm pivoting a little bit, but something that I thought was really cool, like, I loved that scene where he turned back the knights. I was like, that was cool. So freaking cool. Yeah. I didn't love that he had Steven help him. He's like, well, do what I do. Like, put your hands up. Like, I don't think we needed that. But the moment that he actually refers to him as Steven, he doesn't refer to him as the idiot or the worm or the moron. Khonshu is now recognizing and acknowledging the capability that Steven has in certain ways. I mean, figuring out, like, that the star charts, like, folding, doing the certain folds, cool. and saying, like, in ancient Egypt, that's how they navigate it, was by the stars. I'm like, that whole section, again, the show's been so gives me some stuff that I like, but then from a technical aspect, there are things that I'm like, that just kind of irk me. And for a lot of our audience, it's not irking them, and I'm thrilled. Like, I would love to watch it through your eyes. but there is so much stuff here that I really, really do like.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say this. I think this is good character development because Khonshu, as you said, it's good. It's great you point that out, Shannon. Using Steven's name is his way of accepting Steven more. And the reason he's accepting Steven more is because he's seeing that Steven is wanting to be more a part of the situation. Him becoming Mr. Knight, which, of course, in the comics took forever for that to happen, so quickly in the show shows a desire of Steven to be a part of this, but on his own terms. And I think there's a piece of Khonshu that actually respects that and certainly becomes Mr. Knight in that fight, in that arena, to briefly think he can handle the situation. So, and then him becoming Mr. Knight here and figuring out, I mean, without Steven, they don't figure out that they have to move the knight and all this kind of stuff. So Steven is becoming essential. So not only is Marc understanding this, so is Khonshu. And so this kind of forces Khonshu to be a little bit more friendly or a little more accepting of Steven overall. So, and that's going to be fascinating to see how that relationship develops as we're seeing Layla's relationship with Steven develop, as we're seeing Layla's relationship with Marc, how it's kind of changing, how Khonshu's relationship with Marc is changing as well. And Marc's fear that Khonshu wants to take Layla to be his new avatar, all of that. So there's a lot of moving pieces in this. So whatever my issues were with the episode, and I did have a couple, obviously, I got no complaints about the main actors and the storylines and how they're playing them out and where they're going overall. Do I think they cut a few corners in this episode? Yes. But then again, it's a 6-episode series, so you got to get to what you got to get to because you want to land this bird, and you want to land this bird in a powerful way so that people are excited to see this character again for either a second season or in the main movies theatrically. So we shall see with that. Anything more? I mean, does the is the overvoid something? Do you think that they just mentioned, or do you sense that we'll see the overvoid at some point in the next 3 episodes, and maybe the gods themselves in the overvoid without being avatars, but maybe some CGI? Would that scare you to see them as CGI gods in the overvoid?
Not at all. Like the door that they have opened with the show with Khonshu, I'm actually really curious to see what the gods look like in their sort of ethereal form. I think that's a really, really cool idea. Like I don't know how we get there right now, but I actually think that's a really, really good idea, especially if the show does sort of link up with Thor in some way. We get to see these Egyptian gods in their god form. So then when we possibly see them in a few months in July in Thor, like I think that's an awesome idea.
Yeah.
The one thing that really, and like I know we haven't talked about this yet, but the one thing that really kind of bugged me in that big action sequence at the end, is it the Merma? The El Merma, I think that's what they called it.
Yeah, the fighting
Yeah, like the moment that Harrow does demonstrate that power, which I thought was cool, and we see Khonshu telling Marc to summon the suit.
Yeah,
and there are, like, I went back and watched the scene. I'm like, all right, am I being nitpicky here? Probably, just for like my action sequence brain. But you know, you got three guys with guns on Marc and Layla. Harrow does his thing. They sort of look at it, which makes sense. I mean, this is something that none of these individuals have ever seen. And then they come back and Marc's gone. And it's like, oh, where did he go? And suddenly you look up and he's on top of the pyramid dressed up as Moon Knight. That really bothered me because I was like, we need something. We need to see how entranced they are with this magical demonstration that Harrow has done. I'm like, because it just doesn't, from a logic standpoint. Even though, yes, we're dealing with television series about, Egyptian gods, like their logic kind of goes out the window. From a logic standpoint, I'm like, I don't know how Marc vanishes at that point just to become Moon Knight. Like that's like your thing with the Ennead, like, give me the 30s, or with Layla finding Marc, like give me the 30-second scene. That was something like, give me the 5 seconds where Marc is able to casually slip back. Versus him just sort of vanishing and reappearing. That was something that I kind of had an issue with, even though, like, once we actually got to the fight scene, even though I didn't think the CGI was awesome, I loved watching Moon Knight kick ass. Like that was, getting to see the spinning and throwing, the crescent daggers and everything. Like I thought that was awesome. And I imagine we're only going to get more of that as the show goes on. But now with Khonshu imprisoned in stone, is Marc and or Steven going to be able to access the suit?
Right. Good point. Yeah. And one thing to throw in as well here in this situation, and I agree with you, I had a problem with that watching it a second time as well. Like, he's not Batman. I know they make the connection that he might be Marvel's Batman, but he's not Batman. And so him just like kind of disappearing and then appearing all the way up there and that on top of the pier just seemed like,
come on.
Some people would have seen something, I don't care how entranced you are. One more thing we should bring up, and I should kind of clarify, I had no issues with the actress who played Yatzil. I thought she was great as the avatar of Hathor, who is the goddess of music and love. And apparently this character, Hathor, is a sibling of Wakanda's panther god Bast. And so is Khonshu. So maybe she was introduced, given some more of a connection. Certainly she's the one that explains where the sarcophagus might be and why it was held, why it was hidden away and all of that with Amit. So she may be someone who comes back in the Black Panther film, and Black Panther 2, maybe in Wakanda Forever, there's a scene with her. We shall see. So there was a reason she was highlighted having these interactions with Marc, and certainly there seems to be a backstory between Hathor and Khonshu, because she says, it wasn't that long ago that Khonshu didn't mind Hathor's poetry, and which is essentially, hey, we got it on. So I'm going to see. I'd like to. I'm very curious to see where that goes. And I did like the actress who played Yatzil. So of all the avatars, she's the one that stood out to me, and so I like that. The other ones looked like they were in the Mummy Part 5, and I just didn't buy it at all. Just had trouble with it. No offense to them, I just had trouble with it. So, but overall, I think both of us fall in the camp of liking the episode. You a little bit more than I did, but certainly doesn't mean that it wasn't a good episode. Both of us felt it was a good episode, and certainly opened the doors with some more of the developing plot lines between the characters. And we got a little bit more of understanding the gods, the Egyptian gods, and their connection to all of this. But now we've got Khonshu back in stone for the second time, apparently, because he messed with the sky again. And that's another moment too, Shannon, when you spoke about him saying Steven's name. He told Steven, when they encase me in stone, please tell Marc to free me. So there was a softer touch to that. There was a real kind of connection with Steven, that he was trusting him with this very big task. So certainly that's going to be something as we go into episode 4 and we go into Amit's tomb, possibly. What is that going to lead us to? Or maybe it's a flashback episode. I don't know. So what do you think we're going to get here in episode 4? What do you anticipate we're going to be seeing here in episode 4?
Harrow and his crew, they were digging.
Yeah, they were.
Is this a Raiders situation where they possibly, aren't digging in the right spot? The scarab seemed pretty clear where they were supposed to dig. But I imagine, I don't know. It's all going to kind of come down to whether or not Marc and Steven can access the suit without Khonshu. Yeah. I think if they're able to, then Khonshu doesn't come back until the end of episode 6.
Right.
If at all. Like maybe we've seen the end of Khonshu. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But my guess is that we're going to have to see some sort of flashback to sort of resolve the dilemma of Layla's dad.
Yeah.
And whether or not, was it Marc that was partially responsible, or was it Jake that was partially responsible? Like, obviously, we're coming up on episode, we're at the midway point. Like, Jake or whomever is coming, and I think they're probably going to arrive with a vengeance.
Yeah. And certainly, as we said, doesn't need to take over the body. He just takes over the body. And that may be why Marc thinks, like, no, there's not, I wasn't there when your father died, or I had nothing to do with that. It may not be Marc hiding the information from her. It may be because Jake is the one that did it, and Marc just has no idea about it, because clearly neither one of them have an idea of who Jake is, because they both claim, like, I didn't do it when the two guys are killed. The two henchmen are killed there by the knife. Neither one of them says they did it, and believably say that. So clearly Jake's got some things to answer for here, and we're going to see how Jake pops up, and maybe some criticism you made in episode 1 will come to bear here, where Jake shows up looking completely different, like a different hairstyle, different look, different approach, different manner, all of that. So maybe that's what they've been saving that moment for. we shall see. All right. Anything more, Shannon, or shall we wrap up here?
No, I mean, I mean, there are definitely, I have nitpicks with the show, but I'm enjoying the show. Like, I'm really excited to figure out, to find out what happens. So even though, just as a reminder to people that are undoubtedly going to have comments about my critique.
No. Welcome to the internet. That's the game. You know?
I am enjoying the show, even though I don't necessarily agree with all the creative choices.
That's fair. That's totally fair. And I would say that I'm enjoying the show a little bit more than Shannon, overall, a little bit more than Shannon. But yeah, but I'm starting to sense that there are some creative decisions here that I'd like to have bear a little bit more fruit, more enjoyable fruit overall. But we shall see. You got to be patient. This next episode is going to be something interesting, I'm sure. All right. Well, thanks so much for watching the spoiler review episode of episode 3 of Moon Knight here from the Geek Buddies. We appreciate it madly. Michael will be back for our main show and our review of episode 4 next week. So bear with us on that one. Shannon, what do we have to tell him?
Yeah, if you'd like to follow us on social media, on Twitter, it's at @geek_buddies, on Instagram at @the_geek_buddies. If you'd like to follow me on social media, on Twitter, it's at Shannon_McClung, on Instagram at Shannon the Geek Buddy. If you would like to follow the absent Mr. Vogel, it is at MKToon. If you would like to follow the absent Mike Kalinowski, I believe it's at Mike Kalinowski. Right. And if you would like to follow Mr. Rocha, who's very, very present, it is at the Rocha Says.
Yes. My apologies. Of course, Kalinowski will be back joining us as well next week. The two Mikes will be back next week. So for sure. And please remember to follow, to subscribe to the channel down below. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell button so you see when we're dropping all the content we do here on the Outlaw Nation channel. Leave a comment, leave a like. Comments and likes elevate the visibility of the show. Also, we've got a podcast feed, the Geek Buddies podcast feed, where all our stuff is there on audio form. Maybe you don't want to see our pretty faces. You can listen to us while you're working out or taking a bath or taking a hike or going out somewhere, and maybe you're just walking the mall or whatever, as I like to do. Those are things that you can listen to us there. So go and find us wherever you download podcasts. And please remember to leave a review and leave some stars, some 5-star reviews there on there. That helps raise the visibility as well and attracts more ads and more supporters here to our show. And speaking of supporters, big shout out to Carbon Health. Carbon Health has been sponsoring us, and Carbon Health is continuing to sponsor us again for another 3-month stint. So shout out to Carbon Health. Thank you very much. Please go and check them out for all your healthcare needs. Healthcare.com, whatever you've got going on, not healthcare, carbonhealth.com, sorry, carbonhealth.com, whatever you got going on, they will absolutely take care of you. Sometimes you can even get day of visits. That's incredible that sometimes you can be in there and get in to see them day of you having an issue. They got urgent care stuff. They got testing for COVID. If you're going overseas, they got testing for that. They got everything you could possibly need. Just head on over there virtually or in person. They can take care of you. Head on over there to carbonhealth.com. So thank you so much for supporting the Geek Buddies and the Outlaw Nation. All right. We'll talk to you all later. Take care of yourselves. Be well. Have a great weekend. And we'll be back with another spoiler review episode for Moon Knight here from the
Geek
Buddies.